He served in the Honolulu City Council, the state legislature, and in Congress. Who could I be talking about that's going to be my guest today on this show, News Behind the News? Well, I would like to welcome Charles Djou.
Thank you very much for having me on.
Sure, Charles. Well, tell us about you. You've just made a very long trip back from Afghanistan,
Yes.
where you were serving our country. So thank you for doing that. And tell us a little bit about your time in Afghanistan before we get into this whole why you're running for Congress thing.
Afghanistan was very intense. It was it's a very tough place to be. For me, of course, it was an honor to serve, and it was an honor to serve with so many good soldiers. And I really want to convey to all of your viewers that our nation, our community is served by the finest in our nation. And I know everybody says that, politicians say that tritely all the time, but having been there, having served in combat, I can really testify and say that really the best of the best, the finest of our nation are there. With that said, Afghanistan, on the slightly more, on the more trivial aspect of it, I certainly am very happy to be home. I'm happy to have running water again, happy to actually sleep in a bed instead of having to sleep in a tent with 7 other men, happy not to get regularly shot at and bombed and rocketed. And of course, it's always nice to be back with family. But with that said, I also believe that the American people, I think, don't see, unfortunately, and the soldiers who are serving over there, I don't think get the attention that they really deserve. We have sent, right now there's close to 100,000 American soldiers, service members deployed over there, and I don't think they're getting the attention that they deserve. I mean, we have asked them to serve. So many of them sacrifice their lives for our nation, and in some sense are getting ignored, and I think that's remarkably unfortunate. A tremendous amount of progress has and is being made in Afghanistan, but it seems to be that the only thing that gets covered in Afghanistan is the bad news and the negative things that are coming out of that country.
Now, maybe you can tell me a little bit about your unit and what, you're in the Army, right?
Right, yes. I am in the Army Reserve, since I was pulled up as what's called an individual augmentee to serve with the 3rd Brigade Combat Team, 10th Mountain Infantry Division. I was deployed to serve in Forward Operating Base Pasab, which is located in the Zari district of Kandahar Province. Now, Kandahar Province is in southern Afghanistan. It is probably the focal point of the war right now. Kandahar Province and Helmand Province are where the most intense fighting has been going on and is still going on in Afghanistan. And the reason for that is because those 2 particular provinces, Kandahar and Helmand, are where the bulk of the opium growing is going on. And opium production, which is turned into hashish or into heroin, is the lifeblood of the Taliban. The Taliban, as a general statement, they do maybe some hit and run, skirmish attacks upon coalition forces all around the country, but it is in the south where their money source is located, is where they're really willing to stand and to fight. And that's why the real intense fighting that is going on are in those particular areas. For myself, this was a very eye-opening experience, to say the least. Initially I thought I was going to perhaps go to a division headquarters and just plug away in an office. I did not expect to get sent to a brigade combat team, and certainly didn't expect to get sent into perhaps what was arguably the most violent district of the most violent province of arguably the most violent nation on earth. But it was an experience for me. And for me, I come back with a newer, fresher perspective on it all. I have the very unique distinction of having voted in favor of Operation Enduring Freedom as a United States Congressman, and then deploying based on my vote. I'm the only person in the world who can say, literally, I voted myself into the war. Perhaps knowing what I went through, maybe I would have changed my vote, I don't know. But it has certainly given me a much richer perspective and appreciation of what the United States Congress does. And when we ask to deploy young people into harm's way, I certainly have a far deeper appreciation of what that means to go into combat and ask people to serve. Specifically in terms of my duties and operations, when I was down in Forward Operating Base Pasab, I was a JAG officer, but I specifically handled detainee operations. What that means is every time we picked up a combatant on the battlefield, it was my duty and responsibility to vet and decide whether or not that particular detainee was Taliban and consequently should be locked up or should be let go. And this is a far more complex operation than in previous wars that the United States faced. In World War II, if we picked up an enemy combatant and they were wearing a Nazi uniform or they were wearing a Japanese imperial uniform, pretty easy, you locked them up. In this particular war, you pick up somebody on the battlefield, they're not wearing uniforms. They're not necessarily part of an organized in the sense of companies and battalions and brigades, units. And you have to make a judgment call very frequently as to whether or not this particular individual really truly is a bad guy and you should lock him up, or an innocent farmer. And you have to, it's a very fine line in that you don't want to be locking up people who are innocent, who really are just a farmer, because then you get the whole village mad at American and coalition forces. On the other hand, of course, you don't want to be overly releasing individuals who you let them go and immediately they just turn around and come back and attack coalition forces again over and over again. So it was sticky, and some of the Taliban insurgents that I interacted with really are some of the worst, nastiest, most awful individuals I've ever interacted with. Maybe if I can share with you just one really quick story.
Sure, please, tell me.
There was a Taliban, one of my first Taliban insurgents that I interacted with. What he had done was he waited outside American bases watching local Afghan nationals who were working for Americans. Generally speaking, doing just very clerical stuff, sweeping floors, cleaning bathrooms, doing very, very simple manual labor. He would watch them and then follow them home in the middle of the night, drag them out of their homes and kill them. But what was even worse is he would take a nail and write a note saying, this is what happens to Afghans who work with Americans. And he would literally nail that note into their forehead, and then he'd drop the body off at the doorstep of the local mosque.
Wow.
And this is the nature of the enemy that we face in Afghanistan. And I invite your viewers to make a judgment. If these type of individuals are willing to do that to an innocent Afghan, I ask you, what do you think they would do to an American?
Mm-hmm. I think we know a little bit from 9/11.
Yes.
Right?
Yes,
but
yes,
then,
yeah.
Continuing on,
Yeah.
if they get their hands on,
Right.
someone in Afghanistan or anywhere else.
And you know, Afghanistan, it is unfortunate that I think we're making progress there. And I think we're seeing the country stabilize. And I think what the coalition forces are doing is good. But I also believe, Malia, we can't stay there forever.
Right.
This is actually something that has been a slight change for me since I served in Congress. You know, when I was first running for the U.S. Congress, I took the position that we should be there until we have the nation completely stabilized. I believe that we need to be looking to withdraw from that country. We shouldn't have an unlimited commitment. We shouldn't be there forever. But with that said here, I'm also very concerned about a lot of members of Congress who are just saying, get out. You know, 90 days or 180 days, let's just completely get out and do a rushed exit. I think if we do that, what will end up happening is a real tragedy. I mean, we'll have anarchy, civil war, and a complete breakdown of society in Afghanistan. I think the U.S. And NATO forces, we have a plan there for an orderly, structured withdrawal. I think that's a good thing. We shouldn't be there forever. We should be getting out, but let's not rush it, and let's make sure when we withdraw right and not in a disorderly and disorganized fashion.
Right. One of my concerns was hearing about withdrawal was how many people do we have on the ground that and are we taking people out too fast so that the people that are left there, meaning our American troops, are vulnerable because there's not enough of them. You know, so that's all the concern too. I'm sure it's a good process that they've planned, but.
One of the things that I was able to do in Afghanistan, the forward operating base to which I was deployed to, had 4,000 soldiers. But of those 4,000, 1,500 were American and 2,500 were Afghans. So I interacted, worked with, walked with, slept next door to Afghan soldiers. And during my tour of duty, the U.S. forces were gradually trying to turn more and more and more of the operations over to the Afghan army. That's a positive thing, and that's something that I think can and should continue, and we have an orderly timetable to do it. But if we rush it and just all of a sudden completely pull out and just hand it all over to the Afghan army, really, honestly, chaos is going to ensue. I think the Afghan army is making clear progress. They are understanding how to operate as an army and a unified force rather than something that's done by warlords. They understand basics of rule of law instead of rule of the sword or of the gun, so to speak. But I am troubled when I hear too many politicians just saying, throw up your hands, hand that all over to the Afghans and get out.
Right.
That's something that's just, honestly, it's unrealistic and a recipe for disaster, both for the Afghan people and I also believe for the American people. It really is not the right way to do it. So withdraw, yes, but let's make sure we do it in the right way, not in the wrong way.
Well, now you've come from Afghanistan, and now you're coming back into a campaign for Congress.
Yes.
So
and I think some people would legitimately ask, out of one fire and into another.
That's right.
Which one is more intense? I don't know.
That's right. We'll see as things get warming up. But you've already run once, and you were in Congress, and you've also gone up against Colleen Hanabusa before, and so what do you think about it's not really warmed up yet, right? Your race, because you just got back, and things are just going to probably eventually start heating up. It's a funny year this year. I noticed with a lot of races, other than the mayoral race with Governor Cayetano jumping in, and of course the race between Ed Case and Mazie Hirono. Those are a little bit of intensity, but now we'll see what happens with your race now that you're back.
Yes. A few things. First, in terms of just to respond to your point regarding intensity, I think the reason you see a little bit more intensity in the mayor's race and the Democratic primary for the United States Senate is because the primary is so much earlier.
That's true, in August.
Right. This year in 2012, we shifted the traditional Hawaii primary, which usually was in the third week of September, is now in the middle of August. And because of those primaries, I think that's why you see a lot of the focus in the mayor's race and the Democratic race for the U.S. Senate.
Right.
My particular race for the U.S. Congress, the focus is going to be on the general election, which will be in November. So it's I think that's why perhaps you see, yes, there's a little bit more time, and that's why I think you see perhaps a little bit more of the intensity a little bit later. Now, with all of that said here, that is still going to be a competitive race. This will be, I think for the first time, the voters will have two members of Congress going at each other for a congressional seat. We've had this happen before where members of Congress have gone after one another in the state of Hawaii for races for the United States Senate. But to have two members or two individuals who have served in the U.S. Congress run against one another in the U.S. House is something that's unprecedented for a U.S. House seat. And I think this is going to be a very good campaign because it's going to offer a clear contrast for the voters here in Hawaii. I believe that Congress is dysfunctional. I think Congress today is completely broken. It is hyper-partisan. You see so many people on the right and the left, former colleagues of mine in the Republican caucus and a number of Democrats who have such intense partisan blinders that they're unable to work with one another. Malia, one statistic that I'd like all of your viewers to see and understand is the National Journal runs a survey every year of the most liberal and most conservative members of the U.S. Congress. They rank all 435 congressmen from most liberal all the way to the most conservative. But what I found interesting was a year ago when they did this survey, they went back and looked at the numbers, and in 1981, when they first ran this survey, something like 250, somewhere in that ballpark, 250 members out of 435 congressmen ranked in between the liberal most Republican and the conservative most Democrat. So in other words, the majority of the House of Representatives was somewhere in the middle, and that's where the focus of action was. I mean, that's how you crafted legislation, in the middle. When I was in Congress, my final year there in 2010, that number had shrunk from 250 or so down to 7, and I was one of the 7. And I think that at its core is what's wrong with Washington, D.C., and what has really broken down in our nation's capital is that we are more interested in scoring political points, in getting quick sound bites, than we are in really trying to fix problems in our country and find solutions. And too much of what I see right now in Hawaii's congressional delegation, or at least our House members, is they've just fallen in to the model of Washington, D.C. today, of the status quo, of just being a regular member of the Democratic caucus and not really reaching out, being cooperative, or trying to find ways to cooperate, collaborate, and make things work.
Well, one of the things I noticed, because I get the votes every week on who votes how, in our Congress, in our congressional delegation, and it's funny because 9 times out of 10, or I should say 99% of the time, Congressman Hanabusa and Hirono have the same vote. So there's a lot of they say yes, yes, no, no, yes, yes, no, no, down there, and so there's no, doesn't seem to be any kind of diversity or other opinions.
And Malia, that's very dangerous for Hawaii. We're a very small state. With Washington, D.C. so polarized as it is, and with the Republicans in control of the House of Representatives, Hawaii really has no voice. We have no representation, nobody able to talk to the new majority in the U.S. House of Representatives. A lot of states have very strong Republican or Democrat, very partisan congressmen. But a lot of states, or most states I should say, are somewhat protected by that because they have bipartisan congressional delegations. So that when a state-specific issue comes up, they have Republican members who will talk to the Republican caucus and Democrat members who will talk to the Democrat caucus. But in Hawaii, when all of our members are from one political party, it is very easy for the other political party to completely ignore Hawaii and our interests. And a perfect example of that here is, for example, the East-West Center, which saw its funding cut in the House of Representatives. Cut, incidentally, by a freshman Republican from Texas who had never served in public office ever before, ran circles around Mazie Hirono and Colleen Hanabusa. And Colleen and Mazie didn't even bother to argue for funding for the East-West Center on the floor of the House of Representatives. What saved the East-West Center was the fact that Senator Inoue is still the chairman of the Appropriations Committee on the Senate side and was able to reinsert that funding in the U.S. Senate bill. But the danger, I think, our community has to understand is that we put all of our eggs in one basket, and that basket's in the wrong place. We're exceptionally vulnerable. And I think Hawaii, we would be better served by representatives who are willing to cooperate and collaborate with both sides of the aisle and advocate on the interest of Hawaii as a whole, rather than advocate on behalf of the interests of the national partisan party of theirs.
A lot of times I get emails from both congresswomen about different votes, why they took different votes. And a lot of times it seems very, they really do attack Republicans. They couldn't support the budget, for example, recently because, and then there's a whole list of attack, reasons. And I guess that's just the way, just the way it is. But that's kind of goes to what you're saying.
And a lot, I've seen a number of those releases also. Malia, and it seems, I shouldn't say it seems, it looked almost exactly taking it from the talking points put out by the Democratic National Committee or the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, just a copy, tweak a few words, paste, and send it back to be regurgitated to the local media.
That would be an interesting investigation for us.
No, and that's not real representation.
Right.
That's not helpful. And that's not progress. And if I could talk on the budget specifically, Congress is dysfunctional. It is breaking down. And part of I think one of the greatest tragedies of the dysfunctionality of Congress is we haven't been able to fix this fiscal crisis we have in our nation. We have a ballooning national debt. For the first time in our nation's history, our nation's credit rating has been downgraded, and we still are dealing with monster-sized, enormous budget deficits. But yet we have a Congress which only wants to call each other's sides names, and that has been unproductive and unhelpful. During the closing days of when I served in the U.S. Congress, there was a bipartisan commission put together by President Obama, the Simpson-Bowles Bipartisan Deficit Commission. It didn't get a unanimous vote, but it did get a majority vote. If you're familiar with this, it was an 18-member commission, 9 Republicans and 9 Democrats, all very prominent individuals, chaired by Erskine Bowles, Bill Clinton's former chief of staff, and Alan Simpson, a former Republican U.S. Senator from Wyoming. And they put together, in my opinion, a very comprehensive, serious, and sensible plan to fix our budget deficit. And I'm exceptionally disappointed that no one in our delegation has embraced that particular plan. No one is advocating it. And right now it's languishing in the U.S. Congress. That's the type of plan that deserves attention, deserves a representative who's going to be an advocate on behalf of it. But at the same time, I'm very disappointed to see it has not gotten anywhere because of the dysfunctionality and really the problems we see going on in Washington, D.C.
What do you think are the top issues? You have the budget, the deficit, and are those the two top issues, or what do you think are the top issues facing our country right now that you're going to tackle if you get to go back?
Well, clearly, I mean, the budget and fiscal problems is near the top, but the top has got to be the economy and jobs. Our economy is growing far too slowly, and our unemployment rate is much too high. You know, Malia, as you know, our economy tipped into recession in the third quarter of 2008, nearly 4 years ago. At this stage of the business cycle, we really should be going gangbusters. We really, at this stage, 4 years after we first tipped into recession, pretty much any other time when we looked at the normal business cycle, 4 years later, this should be the peak of the economic boom. Our nation should be experiencing economic growth rate of 4 or 5%, and we should have an unemployment rate of around 4%, maybe 4.5%. But instead of seeing an economic growth rate of 4%, we're seeing an economic growth rate now 1% or 2%, less than half of what it should be. And instead of seeing an unemployment rate of 4%, 5%, where our unemployment rate nationally is still at 8.5%, double of what it should be. Clearly, what has happened is that Washington, D.C., since we went into recession in 2008, has failed the American people. And Congress today is so locked into its bitter partisan divide, it has become more interested in sound bites and political scoring than it is in fixing things and turning things around. And I think at its core, I mean, that's clearly the number one issue. But again, the budget deficit and fixing our national debt, I think, is related to that. That also, I think, is a major issue. And then if I could add another point that I think is important for the people here in Hawaii, in our community here, it's making sure that the people of Hawaii have a voice at the table in Washington, which is something that we certainly do not have right now. I do know, and I am familiar with, and can work with the leadership that is currently in the U.S. House of Representatives, and our current delegation has completely failed the people of Hawaii. They are not bringing Hawaii's concerns and interests to the forefront. We are the furthest state away from Washington. It is important to have somebody in Hawaii who's always, constantly, every single day, willing to get in front of the leadership and advocate on behalf of Hawaii's interests, and I think that's what's failing us right now.
So what are your plans if you do get elected? I know it was a very difficult challenge for you because you have your family here and going back and forth. And I think, didn't you say something about how many miles you put on? How you're a mileage plus, the gold member or something, right?
Yes, but, far too many.
Yeah, but it does, it is a public service and it does take a lot of wear and tear on families. And what is it that makes you want to keep going and doing this job?
Malia, I'm not doing this because I want to wax my ego here. I mean, certainly at this stage in my life, I'm one of only 3 individuals who have had the privilege of serving at the municipal level in the city council, at the state level in the legislature, and at the federal level in the Congress. One of only 3 individuals in Hawaii history who have done that, and I'm the first person and the only person who have done all of that before the age of 40. I don't need this just to pad my resume. I'm doing this because I believe it's important. For me, public service and what motivates me and what really gets me going is I'm a dad. I have 3 kids. There are not a lot of jobs out there in this world where when you hold public office, I was able to get up every single morning and say, what am I going to do today to make this world, to make my community a little bit better place for my kids? And there's very few jobs in the world or in this community that you can do that. That's what motivates me. Believe me, it's not out of this burning, yearning desire to get up at 4 o'clock in the morning and do sign waving in all parts of the island, and it's not the constant grind of the campaign that necessarily I'm eager to do, but it's an eagerness to change the status quo and a real, true desire that Hawaii is not living up to its potential, and a desire to see it live up to its potential. That Hawaii is a beautiful community, and the aloha spirit and the feeling of hana that we have here in Hawaii is unique around the world. But I think we are disserved by our government, which is so often trapped in the status quo, so often just does the same thing again and again and again, not because it is good or because it works, but only because that's the way we've always done it for decades and decades. And Hawaii deserves so much more and can be so much better, but we don't have the government that really captures and I think can bring Hawaii to its fullest. And that's what motivates me, and that's why I'm running.
So in terms of Hawaii, what do you think the top issues are here? Also jobs, the economy, the budget, and so on. I mean, when you're going to Congress, what do you plan to do for Hawaii?
Yeah. Several things. I was very proud of the fact that when I was a member of Congress, I was able to be a zealous advocate on a whole range of different issues for Hawaii, advocating on behalf of fixing the Micronesian Compact, which contributes to a lot of our homeless issues here, being an advocate for the military. The military is the second largest sector of our economy. As a combat veteran myself, this is something that I recognize and understand and can be a zealous advocate for Hawaii that I think Hawaii needs and I think Hawaii deserves. And also an advocate for making sure that we have bilateral international connections, Hawaii being the farthest west of any of the American states, the furthest south of any of our states, and all of our connections in the Asia-Pacific region. We want to make sure that Hawaii is integrated with the Asia-Pacific region. And something that I think is neglected all too often by the mainland media and by the Congress as a whole, and unfortunately I think a little bit by our current congressional delegation. I think our representatives haven't been as strong of advocates of making sure that we have those bilateral free trade agreements with our trading partners in Asia, about trying to break down barriers for trade and travel between Asia and the United States. And I want to see that done because, again, I think that will help Hawaii and our community live up to our true potential that we're currently not doing. Malia, I think for a lot of Hawaii residents, and I really appreciate that for the average Hawaii resident, what they're concerned about is when they get up every day and go to work, they're concerned about their jobs, they're concerned about their homes, they're concerned about their kids and their kids' schools, and they want to make their lives better. But what I see all too often is especially our current House representatives, more interested in just ingratiating themselves with the current leadership and structure of the Democratic caucus, and forgetting about average people back here. For me, what grounds me the best is being just an average, typical dad. And I think that gives me a richer perspective and appreciation when, you have to take, and you're dealing with taking your kids to soccer practice on a Saturday morning, dealing with hula practice or ballet practice, worrying about what's happening with your family. That's what grounds me. And that's what I use as my perspective, not what I show up in the headlines or in the news or how you get a soundbite on the national media.
That and being in Afghanistan, right?
Yeah.
That'll ground you too. Well, can you believe we're already out of time? Yeah. 1 second left in the show. Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you very much.
I'm so glad you came on the show, and we'll have you on again. Maybe we'll have a debate between you and Colleen.
Sounds good, Malia.
This has been News Behind the News. Thank you for joining us. Aloha.